welcome to this ritual celebration. And this one is a very special ritual celebration. The most holy day of the year, the most holy symbolic moment of the kalpa. Because this is the night when the grace of Shiva, of the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Lord, who is the God of every religion. We're not worshiping a Hindu God here. We're worshiping the God, whether that God is referred to as Brahman or Allah or Jehovah or the Mother Goddess or Vishnu or any name that one has come in contact with in one's karmic journey that brought about an opening of the heart and the mind to a state that is transcendent of all suffering, that is truly peaceful and still at every level, which is why we have 3 shantis. The mind of the ego is quiet. The soul is in total stillness. And the absolute God Self is shining with eternal grace. And that grace is available on Mahashivaratri for every devotee of Shiva, of God, in any form or name, because God is formless and nameless. But for anyone who wants grace, who wants liberation, who wants the ultimate salvation of the soul, it is offered on this night. But you must want it with all of your heart and your mind and your will. And so this event, again, can only take place in liminal space. It can't take place if you're in the ego frame of reference, but only when you are in the borderline between the finite consciousness and the infinite. And everything is possible. And one's heart is open to receive the highest possibility of realization of the potentiality of consciousness itself to reveal its infinite nature, palpably and completely. And so let us begin this evening's ritual by invoking silently in our minds and hearts the presence of God that brings stillness and eternal awareness and light and power fully into the consciousness. And while we all invoke and open to receive gladly, with ultimate gratitude, the supreme samavesha, the supreme level of possession by God. Or if you prefer, communion with God, but a communion that brings oneness. So I was communing today with Shiva about this evening and received some information to pass to you. Because this is the night when the Tandava is danced. But it's very important that you understand that Maha Shiva Ratri does not occur in chronos time. It's an event that occurs only in kairos time. And the ego knows nothing about kairos time. Because kairos time is the soul's time. And it's the moment the soul fully awakens. And when the soul fully awakens, that consciousness that is suddenly aware of its true nature, that no longer is identified as a body in a world, but as pure consciousness, that is free of any narratives, any stories, any karma, any impurities. When the soul is drawn magnetically back into the ion, into the eternal presence that is oneness, that is the merging with the God Self. And so that is what we are celebrating as the highest reward one can receive for one's willingness to surrender, which no ego is, but the soul can surrender, and once only that, the soul has a yearning for reunion with God, but not the ego. And so that's why this is the moment when the full power of the supreme reality must be not only revealed but activated. So Shiva was giving me different names for and significances of the term Mahashivaratri. But before I go there, I want to make sure everyone sees that Sri Ramana's picture is here, and I want to offer Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. And the reason that I think we all owe a special spiritual debt to Sri Ramana, whose picture is much larger in the lodge than this one, but Ramana said, no, I don't want a large picture, the smaller the better. And that's Ramana for you. Anyone else would like a biggest picture possible. But Ramana said, you know, I spent my life telling people who came to Arunachala, why are you here? I am not the guru. This, if you think it's this body carrying a certain name and who you think is a person who can give you blessings, that's not who I am at all. And if you think that's who you are meeting, well then, you're not in the right mindset to receive the blessing of liberation. But when you know about Ramana's life and you know the impeccable level of renunciation that he was capable of sustaining his whole life, then if that lifestyle is a prerequisite for liberation, we're all doomed. And fortunately, Sri Ramana himself teaches, don't worry, it's not like that. It's not like that for one simple reason, which is the character that you're identified with and thinks is not worthy of liberation and has not developed one's spiritual virtues and generosity of spirit necessary for receiving that level of grace. He says, no. All that is necessary is to realize that the character doesn't actually exist. It's not real. And then you're instantly liberated, because liberation was always only liberation from the character you thought you were, which is where suffering takes place. And when there is no individual, illusory, separate consciousness from God, then all of that disappears. All the karma and the suffering and the sense of even divine abandonment can be overcome with great happiness, mahasukha, without waiting, without having to do a gradual process that usually takes one further away from the real. So Ramana is most famous for a set of teachings called usually the 40 verses on reality. But it was first published in this tiny little kind of book in 1935 called Truth Revealed, or Sat Vidya. And a synopsis of the 40 points is put in here, and I assume it was okayed by Ramana, but I'm going to read a few. 1, reality is at once being and consciousness. That's reality, being and consciousness. That's it. To know that, he says, is to be that in the heart. One must be that in the heart, transcending thought. Because in that state, there's no thinking, there's no need or desire for language, because you are a consciousness that is beyond the capacity of any symbols to capture. And then in the second one he says, absolute surrender to the Supreme Lord, whereby the I and mine are destroyed, is the one means to realize immortality. Okay, now that seems like a pretty high bar to be able to get over, because absolute surrender, in which the one who surrenders disappears. Are you willing to disappear into God consciousness? Disappear your your narrative of being an individual who was born and went through traumas and has attitudes and emotional reactions and attachments to particular people, and is totally convinced that its projection of its dream field is actually reality. And one must be willing to drop all of that away. Very few seem to be open to that level of yearning for grace. But the good news, and I think the essential news that you must take in, is that the prime teaching of Sat Yoga and of really of every highest spiritual lineage that reaches the truth of non-duality, the teaching is very simple, and it's 3 words: Tat Tvam Asi. Thou art that, or that art thou. That meaning the ultimate, infinite consciousness that was never born, never dies, but is immortal and eternal. And that is what you are, whether your ego likes it or not, whether your soul is ready to know it or not and feel it in the heart, it is the truth. And so for some that's good news, because it means ultimately your soul will be ravished by your love for God when your love opens completely. You will know bliss. No bliss and noblesse oblige, right? They go together, because spiritual nobility, the noblesse, is the one who has claimed the royalty of God consciousness, the Raja Yoga, and who is thereby freed from the karmic burdens at one stroke. So that teaching, because it is simply reality, only Shiva is. The ego's illusion, its ignorance, its delusion that it exists as a separate being, will be overcome. But it will be overcome either in the form of the Tandava that Shiva is dancing, called the Ananda Tandava, or in a mode of dance called the Rudra Tandava. And if one chooses the Rudra Tandava, meaning, no thanks, I don't want salvation, it will come anyway, but it may not come in feeling like being ravished in bliss, but perhaps even being raped. Because the ego will be fighting it, resisting it, because most egos do not want to surrender. It's the last thing they want. And Ramana speaks here of a complete surrender. So it's important for us to understand what that means in case you are interested in making a complete surrender. It's the surrender of mind, intellect even, mind and intellect. And the surrender of the heart and the surrender of one's will. Now, I think there are many yogis who are willing to surrender the mind. And then they say, yes, I know, this is all true, non-duality is real, I accept, but I can't feel it. Because they haven't surrendered their heart. And until you surrender your heart, you're not going to feel the bliss of love. You'll just feel the terror of disappearance, the void, the emptiness, the annihilation of the sense of identity. But if there is surrender of the heart and the mind, there's still a problem, because one can surrender both the heart and the mind, or some surrender the heart but not the mind, in which case there is joy, but it's constantly interrupted. Maya keeps returning. What happened to, I was feeling so good a minute ago, and where's Shiva? So, and when the mind isn't surrendered, suddenly it creates doubts, or in a sense of, maybe I don't really understand, or I have to read that again. What did Ramana say? Or there will be some way that the mind will disconnect, even from something that's so simple you couldn't possibly forget it. But the mind does. The mind of the ego is very good at censoring, repressing, dissociating, splitting off, spacing out, falling asleep, whatever it needs to do to defend itself against the bliss of the coming of God in fullness, in totality. So it's the will that's the real problem that has to be given up. The will to exist, the will to have a separate will from God. And for the ego, that's impossible. That would leave me defenseless. I can't give up my will. That's all I got to fight with, right? How am I going to manipulate situations if I don't have my own will? I mean, I've got to accept everything? No way, right? So the surrender of will is a very high achievement. And very few are willing to surrender the will, even though it means that the will of God is your will. But the ego can't understand the implications of that. And it sees only loss, it doesn't see the infinite gain. So I hope none of you are in that trap. But it's certainly, I think, one of the last hurdles to overcome on this journey to Mount Kailash. So here are some of the other names that Shiva gave me for what does Maha Shiva Ratri signify? Well, we could say for one thing, very, very obviously, it's a day of attunement. It's the day of attunement for those who really do attune. And if that attunement is total, it's the day of at-one-ment, which is the name for a high holy day in some form in pretty much every religion. But often the religious believer wants to put it off into the future and celebrate it only as a tradition, not as the real. So it's also the day of the frequency adjustment. Okay? We all vibrate at a particular frequency. Right now, you are vibrating, your mind, your consciousness is vibrating at a particular frequency. If you're in a liminal state or you're in a state of actual invocation of Shiva, that frequency level will be raised, perhaps several assemblage points. That vibrational frequency may even be raised into the merging into the non-duality of I and Shiva. Shivoham, as we refer to that. That self-given grace. And so the frequency adjustment will happen at a certain moment in Kairos time for you. But it will only happen at the moment when there is no longer any resistance to that adjustment. Because Shiva doesn't force himself on anyone. So when it does happen, we could also say it's the moment of divinization. Because you will receive the divine presence, the divine light, and you will palpably recognize that all is the light of God. Everything is made of the pixels of the divine light. And it doesn't actually exist outside of consciousness, but it is the manifestation of God's imagination. A great fiction, a fiction that symbolizes, signifies, and even enacts the truth, but is not the truth. But the truth is the real that brings about the grace of that enactment. It's a very subtle state that is required of us. And I hope that I am in some way helping you to attune to that, realizing that it's available easily if you want it. So it's also the day the ultimate secrets come to light. Because if you're still in the ego, you're carrying secrets about yourself that you don't know. And that your ego can't tolerate knowing. And secrets about reality in all of its infinite richness that can only be known from within the mind of God, that is also integrated with the heart. And therefore to recognize the perfection of everything that happens in your life, in the world, as offering a portal to the Absolute Self, when that is all that you want out of life. And so we could say it's the day of becoming real. Now, of course, we're always real, but we are encased in an unreal identity. And so it's the moment when that drops away and the real is awesome, sublime, splendorous, beyond words, that simply absorb one's attention forever. So, simultaneously with the blissful absorption, though, It is the moment of the ego's self-annihilation. And there must be a willingness to go through that annihilation in order to realize that the nothingness is the space in which the fullness of God consciousness can enter. We have to empty out the space of consciousness from all of the interference patterns in order to hear the divine music and know that music to be the music of our own heart. And so it's the moment that we celebrate the escaton. And I say celebrate the eschaton because most beings fear the eschaton, because eschaton means the end. But it's only the end of suffering, the end of illusion. And the end is the beginning of the world of the miraculous, the world of the gods. So in Kali Yuga, you could say, God is dreaming. And at the moment when God awakens within the soul, that's the eschaton, the awakening. Why? Because God's light so fills your consciousness that all the pixels that create a sense of differentiation and movement in time and space, they gradually are washed out, and only the light remains. Which is very difficult for the ego to imagine, but it will be the way that it ends, in the soft yet ever more intense revelation that there is only the infinite light, and you are that. You were never an individual. And so no one realizes it because it is always only that. And so we can say it's the instant in which the awakening becomes eternal. But there's a third state of God consciousness besides dreaming and waking, which is when God's in deep sleep. And when God's in deep sleep, because you could say God is also a metaphor for the light, the sun, the infinite light. When God sleeps, the world becomes night. There is no sun or moon. Shiva and Shakti disappear, but what is revealed is a sky filled with stars. And each star is a divine being. And the whole constellation, the whole galactic scenario of the zodiac is the revelation of the fullness of God consciousness. But the stars will appear in the world as the gods who will populate a new kingdom of heaven when we have achieved the real Mahashivaratri. So ultimately, what this day signifies, this day and night, because it's a day when, let's say, those who are orthodox, not as Hindus necessarily, but as seekers of truth, of the real, will fast and will fast from thought as well as from food in order to become as empty as possible at every level, as empty of any content, so that the original deathless, birthless nature becomes all that abides. And the grace is perceived in the eyes of every being and in the heart of every being, whether that being is ready to admit that presence or not. It is felt. It is felt. If you are living in good faith and are honest with your own heart, you will feel that benign, benevolent, healing presence that takes away all the pain, all the anger, all the sadness, all the despair, all of the fragmentation of consciousness into the unified whole of the one self that we are. And a state of total communion, of samsara and nirvana becomes entwined. So it's remembered by the Hindus as the night when Shiva and Shakti get married, or consummate the marriage, actually. It's the blissful consummation of the love of Shiva and Shakti. Which is also the love of the heart for the mind, for the buddhi, the mind of God, and of the mind surrender to the heart, and the will surrender to the inconceivable. So let's imagine now, because all you have to do is imagine this. You don't have to really achieve it. You can get there just by imagining it. Why? Because it's all imagination anyway. But let yourself imagine, okay? That you'd say, yes, let's do it tonight. By God, let's go for it. Why wait? Let's do it. So feel what it's like to surrender your mind, your consciousness, your ability to know, to think, to cognize, however you wish to put it, your ability to discern and differentiate from a level of duality, of subject and object being different and separate, that produces a sense of lack and desire and otherness and a sense of alienation and of disappointment. Because nothing that the ego desires or is attached to can bring fulfillment. And one says, okay, I'm done with disappointment. Now I want only the mind the wisdom of God. And so imagine you're just receiving that wisdom that overcomes all the ego's thought patterns. And then that wisdom gives you the courage to surrender your heart. So imagine you surrender, meaning you just love your infinite self. You would never want to leave your infinite self to be a petty ego, would you? No, it's impossible. To be the blissful infinite self who is eternal and immortal and free. Free in a way that you can't imagine what freedom is when there is sovereignty over the mind that never falls into Maya and therefore has no karma and no malas. This is the true nirmala state and nirguna state and nivritti state and nirvikalpa state. But if you choose then on top of that, imagine you also give your will. So there is no return from that, because there couldn't be a will to come back into the ego. Swaha. Imagine you've given that to. And how wondrous that feels to be free. Free in such a way that there is no thought, no emotion, no desire, no fear. No lamentation, no complaint, no yearning. But just as Ramana said, being and consciousness as one. And you have never been anything else but that. And whatever part that you have played in this world, that the ego cannot understand, why me? Why did I have to go through this? What did I do wrong? Or what's the thing I haven't figured out that'll get me out of this trap or this malaise or this quicksand or just this denial, this whitewashing, this sense of I don't need God. I'm happy with my focaccia and my kombucha and who knows what other jouissance you're partaking of. That'll be enough. I'll get drunk a little bit on something that isn't the divine nectar, but hey, we'll settle for that occasionally, or we'll settle for some proxy, some substitute, some object of desire that isn't God. And imagine now that's gone. And how free that is, how liberating it is just to let go. That's what we're celebrating tonight, that is available to us all, here and now. If we are willing to be who and what we really are, and only that. So that's the message I was given to transmit, to share, to enjoy with you. And it comes with the understanding that your imagination is God's imagination. There aren't two. And even the imaginary of the ego is real, because it is the will of God to not awaken, to your true nature. If that is not happening, as much as it is the will of God to awaken you, if that is happening. In either case, whatever is happening is perfect. Because the moment in which that will be realized is predestined. Because nothing ever really happens. We don't do anything. We don't have a will separate from Shiva, even to surrender to Shiva. Even that must fall away. That's the renunciation of renunciation. And that is our saving grace. And I hope that every Sat Yogi, every seeker of truth, of love, of light, of salvation, recognizes that the grace will be unconcealed at the moment that your will is completely and only yearning for that. Tat Tvam Asi. Namaste.